Welcome to Walking the Earth. Today we are in the Lumbini Sacred Garden in the Theravada monastic section at a stupa built by Myanmar. So it's a Burmese style stupa, and it resembles the Shwedagon pagoda in Yangon, in Rangoon, in Burma, Myanmar. So this is a lovely stupa, a lovely style that I believe is derived from the stupa at Kesaria in Bihar, which is the ruins of it had a big impact on Southeast Asia and on the styles. And then this style, you see similar styles throughout Southeast Asia. But I really appreciate this one. I visited Shwedagon years ago, and it's a very powerful place and a very interesting place that has relics of the Buddha and I believe several past Buddhas as well. And I'm not sure about this one in particular, but it's quite lovely. Shaped like a kind of like a bell, and has connections to stupa styles that you will see in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, in Laos, and that there were older expressions in India in the Middle Lands that have decayed and been destroyed since. So Myanmar still preserves a lot of the Theravada styles that India had before its final flowering, as far as I'm aware. So this is also, this style, the Shwedagon Pagoda was originally, as far as I'm aware, built by the Mon people. And the Mon people became Theravada Buddhists at least 1,000 years ago, and then had a big impact on the bomber who had invaded from up in the Tibetan highlands, I believe, and had come down through what is now Myanmar, down by Yangon and into the Mon territories, and conquered those territories. And so the Mon people had already been developing their own stupa styles and had their own expressions of Buddhism, which then became absorbed into Burmese expressions, because Bomber is related to the word Burmese, or vice versa. And then you also had the Mon then had a tremendous impact on Thailand, on Siam, as they move away from Hinduism and Mahayana Buddhism of the Khmer, when they were influenced by the Khmer, and more toward like the Theravada expression of the Mon and of Sri Lanka, Ceylon, from ancient times. So this is very interesting, and I'd like to study this more to better understand the architectural impacts and influences. But this is a very lovely location here in the Theravada section. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the Theravada section. The Lumbini Sacred Garden has two monastic compounds. One is full of Mahayana temples and monasteries. That includes Vajrayana. And then a smaller section is the Theravada section. Theravada means way of the elders. The old school, the original school, is from a certain perspective. Now, the Mahayana have given the Theravada a disparaging term called the Hinayana, which means lesser vehicle, meaning that they have the greater vehicle. Mahayana meaning great vehicle or greater vehicle. And the Theravada is one of 17 or 18 original schools of Buddhism which developed within the first few hundred years of after the Buddha's enlightenment and his teaching. And among those 17, 18 schools, only bits and pieces remain. Theravada is the only complete ancient school remaining and surviving to this day. And we find it strong in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, in Thailand, in Laos, in Cambodia. So it's in these various areas. And then there are little communities throughout other areas of Southeast Asia. You can find it to some extent in Vietnam, to some extent in Malaysia. And there's still pockets redeveloping in the original Indian homelands. Like, so for instance, as Buddhism was being absorbed back into Shaivite and Vaishnavite traditions, and then being destroyed and annihilated by invaders, many monks took scriptures, statues, teachings, practices, and left India and moved up into Nepal and then into Tibet. Some made their ways up into what are now the northeast states of India, including, and then into Bangladesh, into the Chittagong hill tracts, and then some made their way into Myanmar and beyond. And then if they were in the Theravada tradition, they might go and take refuge in Sri Lanka in the traditional Theravada lands. So this monastic area has expressions of Theravada Buddhism. Other surviving elements from the original schools, you can find elements of the Sarvastivadins and the Sautrantikas and the Mula Sarvastivadin Vinaya or monastic code is still present among the Tibetans. The Dharma Guptaka or Guptika Vinaya or monastic code still exists within East Asia, and they have nuns in both of those traditions, whereas the Theravadins they no longer have nuns. They do have lay nuns, which just take a few precepts, but now there's a controversial movement, like to take in some of the ancient lineage from the Dharma Guptikas, but the Theravada typically don't accept this. And so anyway, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the survivals. There will still also, while the Theravadins preserved in Pali the entire Tipitaka, as far as I'm aware, in China, Korea, Japan, there are ancient Tipitakas still existing that are called the Agamas that were preserved from the Sarvastivadins. And so we can actually, in a scholarly endeavor, we can compare and contrast these two collections. And that's very interesting. There is, like, the Theravadins did have a number of connecting points to the Mahayanists. Like, so for instance, they used to live in the same monastic compounds. They didn't war, they disagreed. Sometimes they would separate and move to different areas, but in general, they didn't war on one another like we see sects within Christianity and Islam war on one another to this day. That is not a common phenomena in the Buddhist world because of their ahimsa approach, their non-violent approach. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been violence within the Buddhist world. There has, certainly, but it has been different, and within the religious monastic communities, it's been less so. And both groups, the Mahayana and the Theravada, had strong cults associated with the Buddha to come, Maitreya, about 1800, 2000 years ago. As far as I'm aware, they also had there was a form of Vajrayana that took root within the Theravadan lands, where they practiced visualizations and had some very similar practices to what you would find up in Tibet. And so it's kind of like there were a lot of interesting kind of inflows and outflows where Theravada influenced Vajrayana and Vajrayana influenced Theravada. This is my understanding. It's a limited understanding. It's an early stage of study. I have studied these things for a few years on the fringes and the basics to better understand comparative religion. But there's so much more to learn. It's very fascinating, and I'm very interested in the world traditions of Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and then other movements associated with, say, the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, that are existing to this day in some form, but the main living traditions are the three that I mentioned at first. And so here in this Theravada area, you can study you can learn a little bit about the architecture and the religion and the spirituality of the Theravadins throughout Southeast Asia and South Asia. Theravada is taking root once again in the South Asian lands through the Vipassana movements of Mahasi Sayadaw and of U Ba Khin through S.N. Goenka. And also, so in India and in Nepal, you were seeing more people in, because many of the outcasts, the Dalits, they decided to en masse, they did a mass study of the various religions, and they chose Buddhism for themselves because it stands against the caste system, and it appreciates science and intellectual inquiry and philosophy. And they disregarded Christianity and Islam as colonial expressions and said that those people had done damage to their communities and had racism and casteism, etc. I understand this is a complex phenomenon. Some people are going to disagree with this, but I'm just saying that there's a movement, especially in Maharashtra, where there are many people who had been outcasts and outside of the caste system and were very disrespected and treated very badly. They have become Buddhist, and they are practicing and learning their religion and their spiritual practices all across South Asia. So it's very interesting to see Buddhism once again awakening in its homelands, including Nepal here in the Terai. And just wandering through here, seeing many Nepali villagers go and visit the various temples all throughout the day, and that's been very interesting to see that. So there's a lot of syncretism, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next few years. But I wanted to share a little bit about this section of the Sacred Garden and the Theravada monastic complex and the Theravadans here at this beautiful stupa, which goes all the way back, at least in its structure and design, to somewhere like maybe 1800 to 2000 years ago plus, from Caesarea, and maybe even before that. This shape, this design. And there were also connectors within the island nations, within Indonesia, Sumatra, and Java, from the Srivijaya era, the Srivijayan Empire that extended throughout Southeast Asia, and then later the Mon people, and then the Bamar. Like a very interesting, if you want to go to a very interesting temple complex in the world that's related to this, Bagan in Myanmar, in Burma, is quite amazing. It's a very beautiful place. So I just wanted to share a little bit about that. If you look over and see this column with the 4 elephants and the Dhamma wheel above it, then this is similar to the capstone that we would have found on some of the Ashoka pillars. The Ashoka pillars, which gave ethical encouragements and encouraged unity among the people and among the Sangha, and encouraged people to be ethical and to engage in non-harming. The Ashoka pillars, they're at the various corners of this stupa compound. This is 4 elephants. The Dhamma wheel signifies the Noble Eightfold Path. The elephant is often a symbol, and the rhino of Buddhism and of the monks and nuns. So we're just walking around, and it's interesting, when I was traveling in Myanmar, at the temples they often have, and in Thailand, they have statues associated with the various days of the week, and so people, and then certain days, people go and will wash statues. And here's 4 horses on one of the columns, and that's interesting. So that the horses were related to the Aryan people, who were charioteers, metal workers. That's the symbol of the wheel. The Buddha also had a close relationship with his horse when he was growing up. As did many of the Aryan people across space and time. Like, see, here's Friday. And so there are various shrines as you wander around the stupa. Here's another column, and it looks like on this one we've got cows or bulls at the top of the column. Now, the Ashoka pillars extended all across the Mauryan Empire 2,300 years ago, and sometimes there would be writings on the column itself. Sometimes there would be a slab of stone, like you see down in Junagadh in Gujarat, and they were written in the Burmese script. They would often be written in the local language of the people, some kind of Prakrits related to Sanskrit and Pali. Sometimes it would be written, like up in Afghanistan. So his territories, the Mauryan territories extended, included Afghanistan, all of Pakistan, almost all of India and Bangladesh, with the exception of Orissa, which used to be Kalinga, the Kalingan kingdom, and southern India down in the Tamil and Kerala territories. So up in Afghanistan, his edicts, his writings on the columns were written in Aramaic, which is quite interesting because that was the language of Isa alayhi salam, of Jesus, of Nebi Yeshua, of Prophet Yeshua, the Messiah, who there are many who believe that he actually traveled to India 2,000 years ago. So he would have gone, like if he followed the Silk Road, if he would have followed the Great Royal Road that extended from Anatolia all the way to Baghdad and then up to Khorasan to Bactria. So maybe he could have easily traveled to Baghdad, and then he could have traveled from Baghdad up to Bactria, and then from Bactria, which Muslims call Khorasan, it's now in Afghanistan. So he would have traveled through the eastern Persian lands and easily gone down to Takshila in the Punjab. Punjab, Panjab, 5 rivers. This is the Indus River area. And then it's very easy, he could have connected and gone through the Gangetic River area to the Middle Lands to visit the places of the historic Buddha. There's a good chance that he encountered Buddhists in Shem, in Syria, and in Egypt. In Egypt, we know about the Therapeutae, who were forerunners of Christian monasticism. Therapeutae, scholars have said that this may very well be a corruption of the word Theravada, way of the elders. So he could have encountered Buddhist monks around Alexandria, Egypt, and also up by Damascus, and in between there might have been monastic communities or communities influenced by the Buddhists. And then, of course, through the Fertile Crescent and all along the Proto-Silk Road, the Silk Road as it was coming together, especially in the Eastern Persian lands, where there were expressions of, the original schools. When he was, matter of fact, the time when he was growing up and about to teach, this is 2,000 years ago, this is the time when Mahayana is beginning to develop and take root, which is like 2,000 to 2,100 years ago it begins. And so he would have been he would have heard about a Buddhism that is from the early original 17 to 18 schools. So he may have encountered the Sarvastivadins, the Sautrantikas. He may have encountered a number of the early schools, including Theravada. And if he went to Takshila, and Kashmir, which were very important centers of learning, and Balkh, especially up in Bactria, and then gone down and learned more, and then meditated at lakes and caves, and then traveled along the Ganges and Yamuna all the way to the middle lands of UP and Bihar and this area of the tribe. He may have visited these areas. We don't know for certain. There are a lot of rumors. There are some indicators that are present within some of the ancient texts. And as far as like looking for traits, characteristics, qualities, teachings, connecting points, then we certainly can see a lot of connecting points to Buddhist teachings. And it would be very fascinating to look more into this. I would like to do some videos on this very topic. It's interesting that within the Islamic tradition, speaking about the end times, when he returns, he's said to return wearing yellow robes or saffron robes. These are the colors of Buddhist monks, especially Theravada monks in some of the early schools of Buddhism, which would have been present around the time when he was there. He's also associated with traveling within the Sufi tradition. He has a lot of, if you read like the Gospel of Thomas and some of his sayings within the Gospels that are incorporated in the canonical Bible, then you will see a lot of connecting points toward Buddhist concepts. I will go through in the future. I would love to show the connecting points and discuss how there was continuity. Also, Yeshua shares a common title with the Buddha, the Great Healer. They're both known for healing. They're both known for being men of ethics, men of compassion and kindness and loving kindness, men of justice. So anyway, we will discuss that more in the future, but I wanted to just discuss the connection between the Therapeutae and the Theravada and the potential of finding connecting points to Jesus Christ, to Yeshua the Messiah, to Isa alayhi salam. So this is very fascinating to me, something I'd like to look more into in the future. Just to imagine that he may have gone to Kashmir, to the Punjab, to the Middle Lands, and traveled extensively, and then had an enlightenment experience necessitating him returning to his people and doing his best to wake them up. Also, that might have been part of what brought him along the Silk Road, was to find the 10 lost tribes, that he felt he had a mission to regather the peoples of ancient Bani Israel. This is a very fascinating concept. And then he needed to go back to his people and bring them out of corruption and more into an ethical and purifying way of life. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this to a close, but let's seek knowledge even unto China, even to the ends of the earth. Let's be hungry and thirsty for knowledge and come into knowledge of self, to know who we are as humans and to come out of a broken and toxic state into a whole, pure and purifying state and be of benefit to as many as possible. So everyone, be peaceful, be healthy, and be happy.